I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about R2C2. People talk a lot about it, and I just had wanted to kind of, especially in Calgary, just talk very briefly about kind of what triggered the development of the model and then what the model has to offer. So the background is that physicians, for the most part, have very little feedback in their environment. It's becoming more appropriate now, but that feedback that we're getting is still not being used very effectively. So I'm just as bad as everyone else. When I get my HCQA report, I put it aside and I think, yeah, I'll look at that when I have a little time. But even when we do give people more data, and this is not just physicians, this is everybody, even when we do give people more data, they often don't accept it or have it impact their performance, even if it's very good data and it's presented very well. So our question was, could we develop a feedback model that would facilitate acceptance and the use of feedback data? Based on that, we decided to develop a feedback model that we felt would be effective. Now, the model has been developed and used in a number of contexts. It's been used in residency, it's been used with practicing physicians, and it's been used in groups of physicians. So I'm going to talk about the model generally, but recognizing that it's been applied and studied in all of those settings. So the purpose was performance improvement, basically, to encourage individuals to really reflect on their practice, not just look at it, but actually think about it, and what their perspectives were and their ideas about that data. Work on promoting acceptance of that feedback so we don't get stuck in that ignore, reject pile. And then foster self-direction, and then coach for change. Our hope was as well is that by going through this kind of cycle that it would enhance self-assessment. So as people get used to using data to assess and make decisions, that even when they were outside of the project or reflective perhaps a residency program, that would have been built into their process and they would continue to do it. They would see it as a valuable thing. So this is the model that we developed, and I'll go through it in detail. And this is the R2C2. So R for rapport, second R for reactions, first C for content, and second C for coaching. I don't like mnemonics for the most part because I always forget and I spend more time thinking about them, but this one's pretty easy. So rapport building enhances the whole aspect of it. Without rapport building, you don't get to any of the others. So it surrounds everything else that we do. Understanding the data and exploring people's reactions to it is absolutely critical. And then finally, taking that next step, because a lot of audit and feedback, but other forms of education will stop here and don't go on then to the coaching for change. Although this looks very linear, it's not. It's very iterative, and we found in our studies that people rotated back up through these last three phases quite often. So stage one then is to build rapport and relationships. I'm sorry that is blocking all that up top, but anyway. So as I've mentioned, we're really looking at engaging people, building relationships with them, looking very carefully at trust, and then making sure that we understand their context. And understanding their context, we found over and over again, is a crucial part of the relationship building. So in the model, we've also provided strategies for how to address that. So making sure that if you're facilitating, you're being really clear about your background and where you stand relative to their context. And having someone else that knows that context better can be helpful. Making sure that you have agendas and goals for the meeting. And then asking people, what's your assessment experience been like? What kind of feedback have you had? What's worked for you in the past? How do you think you're doing? And what are your strengths? and then what they would hope to get out of the session as a whole. Because often you can get a very good sense of how committed people are to that. So this piece, I cannot emphasize enough. People think, oh yeah, that takes time and we just need to get into the data. Don't do it. This relationship building piece is really important. So especially in a group setting, making sure that you know the group, you know the context of the group, that everybody kind of has been introduced and knows each other would be really important. The second stage is exploring the reactions and perceptions of the data. So this pulls in the emotional component that we often don't think about when it comes to data. People find it very emotional to get this data. So we're really looking at demonstrating our understanding of the difficulty with that, and that their views and their feelings about that are understood. So anything striking, anything surprise you, and then sometimes this is a very important question. How does it compare with how you thought you were going to do? And then very important to provide some support for that. It's really tough when your data isn't congruent with what you thought it was going to be, and that's often the case that people have. Stage 2 is looking at reactions and perceptions. Stage 3 is we want them to be super clear about what the data means to them in their setting. So we're looking, that previous stage is looking at their kind of reactions to it and how upset they are, or maybe they're happy about it. This stage is being sure that the data itself and the actual content is super clear. And that this is the stage where you also start talking about opportunities. What could be different? What are you identifying? What else should we be thinking about? Are there things that aren't clear to you? Maybe we need to go through it in sections. Are there some patterns? And what strikes you as something to focus on? The collaborative nature of this is super important. So one of the problems we had in the residency study was that preceptors wanted to do mini lectures about this. They didn't want to have this being a collaborative interaction. So we would see preceptors, for example, where 95% of the talking was done by preceptors, and they were proposing what they saw in the data. They were proposing what they thought maybe should be a change. And that is not effective, and you can hear it in the transcripts, as opposed to people that were actually following through and building this as a collaborative process. And then the final stage is coaching for performance change. So really want to focus in on what people think and keep it minimal. I often see change plans that are, 4 or 5 different changes being, and we suggest that you keep it to 1 to 2, probably 3 at the very most, and then break it down very carefully. What exactly is it that you're going to do? What's it going to look like? What else do you need to integrate that? Who's going to notice? How are they going to tell? And how are we going to check back on this and see if in fact you've been successful? Certainly resource use can be really important across all of those groups. So the goal is really to get the individual to identify opportunities and develop an achievable plan. So again, this is a plan that is collaboratively developed, that primarily is established by the learner, the physician, and that then is facilitated and expanded through the use of the coach. So I would strongly encourage having a written format. We found in the work we'd done across those groups that physician groups for the most part didn't have a written format. And in the residency groups, it was about 50-50. And in the residency groups, if they had done a learning change plan, the likelihood of that being explored at a subsequent visit, checking in, making sure that in fact things had changed, or whether they'd run into trouble, or if there was anything going on, was much, much higher. So I think there's good evidence in the commitment to change literature as well, but I think it is really important to have something written that people can look at and refer back to.